Good morning, good afternoon, and for some of you, good evening. Welcome to this month's webinar, Understanding Tariffs and What They Mean for the Racket Sport Industry. I'm Robin Duda. I'm the CEO and co-founder of RacquetX, the home court for racket sports and the largest gathering of businesses, investors, players, coaches, fans, and anyone who loves a racket or a paddle across all racket sports. Before we get into exciting conversation today, I wanted to highlight a few things that are going on with our brand. We are still on the road in partnership with the Directors Club of America. We are going to be coming next to Austin, October 12th, which is just like a week and a half-ish away. We can't wait to see you and celebrate there. Um, at the Austin Country Club, Atlanta, November 9th at Ainsley Golf Club, in Orlando, January 22nd, TBD. We'll be finalizing that in the next week or two, but it's sure to be a really exciting time. If you're a director of racket sports, owner of a club, looking to build something, just interested in general about what's happening in the world of clubs, this event is for you. We want to, again, we're striving to provide our audience with the things that they're most needed to help you continue to grow, give solutions to your biggest challenges, access each other, and selfishly for me, be in the field with clubs who are doing big things and hearing how we can continue to help that growth and even bigger things in the future for all racket sports. Um, if anything is like the first, if any of the following three are like the first two that we had in Philly and LA, it's sure to be an amazing time. Also, big news, tickets officially for all Racket X, March 13th to the 15th in Fort Lauderdale this year, go on sale tomorrow. So mark your calendars, get your tickets. The lowest rates will be available starting tomorrow. And we cannot wait. We can't believe that we are like 6 months away from joining you all again in South Florida. Head to our website, theracquetx.com, for all of your info and to register. We'll make sure that we put that link in the chat. Check it out. It's sure to be an amazing time. Now, I've been hearing a lot about tariffs in the industry. We have a lot of folks who are court builders and manufacturers in Europe. We have businesses in the US who supply and get things from different countries in Asia, particularly China. It's a big concern. And we thought that, again, we're here to serve some of the biggest challenges and provide you all with as much information as possible. I personally can't help you with tariffs. However, our amazing guest, Bonnie McLaughlin, who is the VP of External Affairs and Industry Relations at SFIA, is here to break things down for us, answer questions. This is a two-part webinar. This part, there's going to be an overview by Bonnie, updates on what's happening, and we're going to be taking as many questions that you have as possible. Click them in the chat. We're going to answer what we can, but we're going to take all of these questions. She's going to take them back to her team and to Washington and get us answers for our part two, where there'll be a second set of updates later this year, as well as we're going to answer every question we possibly can to make sure that you all have the accurate facts and information that you need to make the business decisions that affect you and your companies as best as possible. So Bonnie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Robin, and to the audience who's joined today. It is wonderful to get to connect with you all. I wish it was on a different topic, but we are here and in this together, and so we will navigate our way in, around, and through together as well. As Robin mentioned, I'll give an overview of the state of where things stand tariff-wise. We can certainly touch on the Supreme Court case. We can touch on a number of very timely, topical things. We can touch on some of the recent tariff updates that have happened, but really want to make sure that we can go in any direction that you all want to with your questions and thoughts. And if we don't have that direct answer today, as Robin mentioned, we'll have this next webinar in early November, but there's also room in between then for us to get some answers for you as well. So to set the stage, the only thing that is really certain right now in the tariff landscape is uncertainty. But what we do know is that the tariffs are here to stay, whether that is through IEEPA, whether that is through 232s, whether that is through some other more lesser used tariff provisions, all of those are in play and on the table. And as we see in real time, it is not something that is slowing down as far as executive orders or updates of that nature. At SFIA, what we have chosen to do for our members is, if something is officially posted on whitehouse.gov, if there's an executive order, a framework, something that goes on the Federal Register, that is when we consider it, quote unquote, real. Now, within that, though, we have announcements that are vague. We have announcements of frameworks where there's a lot of questions that aren't answered. And so, something that we really encourage people to do: reach out to us, reach out to your peers. This is a time as an industry to come together. So reach out to your competitors. The more we can all understand and fact find around this, the more consistent we can be as an industry. And then the easier time we will, in theory, have with figuring out how to navigate the duties, how to do your paperwork correctly, how to not get flagged by CBP. So we'll chat through all of that. But as far as where we are currently, we have some frameworks and deals with a few key countries. I think, we all are kind of familiar with those. Then we have the announcement last month about the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. And what that was really indicative of for us was that this whiplash isn't ending, because as we all know, that went into effect right away. So that announcement comes out of nowhere, goes into effect right away, and it's very confusing and very challenging for us all to navigate. The important thing to keep in mind, or one of the important things to keep in mind, is that in this case, the people who are, I think of it as giving the test, they don't have all the answers either. So there is a lot of this uncertainty and a lot of need to just do our best, guess as correctly as we can. And that is not a fun way to run a business or have your structure. But again, keep in mind that your peers, your competitors, your friends, we're all in this together. It's also an interesting time because I think a lot of us, myself included, feel like there are questions that we should have answers to, and we don't, because in a lot of cases those answers don't exist, or they're very hard to find, or they are vague and they're open to a lot of different interpretations. So again, strength and safety in numbers is kind of our theme and one of our big pieces of advice right now. But as you all know, we have the IEEPA tariffs and the Section 232 tariffs that are currently sort of the biggest bears on the backs of our industry. And cutting right to that quick, we have the IEEPA tariff Supreme Court case, which is currently in its, for lack of super legal term, discovery period. And in early November, that case will start to hear arguments. Then we will be in a little bit of a black hole for a minute because we don't know when that ruling will come down. I don't think it's going to be in late June, July, when the Supreme Court typically issues rulings. I do think we'll have it sooner. I think there's a world in which they try to have that ruling by the end of the calendar year for business and planning perspectives. But the outcome of that case is, I think, why we are starting to see a little bit more of a use of the 232. So we saw it with steel and aluminum. We saw it yesterday with some lumber, timber, some of those specific, more furniture-focused tariffs, because the 232s do go through an official policy process. So that's a little bit of a silver lining, which is that with 232s, they are published, there's an opportunity to rebut or provide comments, and then revisions can be made. It's not to say that they always will be made, but at least there is some more opportunity for public input versus the executive order, or like we kind of like to call them, the tariff by Truth Social that has been happening previously. So with 232s, we have a little more of a process. The other harbinger that we are potentially entering into what is hopefully a little bit more of a traditional policy lane for these things is, there was an announcement made on September 5th, which I believe was a Friday, came out later in the evening on whitehouse.gov, and it was another modification of the reciprocal tariffs. It's a very long announcement, and it doesn't really actually say much of substance, but what it does mean is that the president has expanded negotiating powers to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and the Department of Commerce to continue negotiations. So rather than only EO or only the president being the person making the decisions, we're expanding those decision-making capacities, which in theory should be a good thing as far as the ability to get to people in those roles and to, again, have that more traditional policy making process. That is probably our best avenue to get, whether it's exemptions, to get modifications, and just to further educate the administration about the harm that this is doing to an industry that, in theory, they very, very much support. So we are working and banging on those doors every day, really working that drumbeat every day. That's not to say that the president won't pick and choose certain deals that he will want to be a part of. Whenever China is finalized, whatever happens with China, that will be one that he will certainly be at the forefront of. I think China will ultimately rest on what happens with the IEEPA Supreme Court tariffs, and they may even find a way to protect China and carve out some of the other IEEPA tariffs from places like Brazil, where the motivation is primarily political and not actually an international emergency. So that is kind of the current landscape overview. Some things that are very, very key to keep in mind as you navigate what's happening right now is that, one, and it's a lot of work, but have your playbook for every possible scenario, because these are coming fast and furious. And that playbook might not be 20 pages and it might not have all the answers, but that way you have in front of you, if this, then that. If this happens, then I know what to do here. If that happens, I know what to do there. And we are happy to help with that too. But it's really important to, we've now seen so many different scenarios with these tariffs. It's important to know what you're going to do and to get with your teams and understand what you're going to do for each different scenario that's out there. Another thing is to just, have your ducks in a row. Like we talked about, Customs and Border Patrol are implementing and collecting something that they are also learning on the fly and as we go. So the more consistent we can be, the more transparent you can be, even if how you've calculated things might not be 100% correct. There's not necessarily one person who knows what that 100% correct is. So if we work together as an industry to try to interpret things and understand things, and we're putting forth consistent receipts and consistent paperwork, I think it will be a lot easier for CBP to say, okay, this seems right versus this is really flagging, this seems like something that we absolutely need to go back and work through with this particular company. So we want to help people be able to get your supplies in as seamlessly as possible. Of course, we want those rates to be as low as possible, but the seamless supply in is an important piece of that. And one
I
of
mean,
the other,
could I ask one quick question
yes,
on that? Not to cut you off, but how have you seen other industries if you have worked together to collaborate on this? So, is it an association that kind of takes on this role within each of this? Like, I guess, how
yeah.
can I'm trying to figure out how we can help or how we can guide the further collaboration around some of this paperwork.
Yes, great question. It can certainly be the association standpoint, but I think even more important than that, the association can be the convener, but it is about whether it's your supply chain leaders, your operations leaders, whoever it is within your organization who's running that work. It's about those people talking to their peers in the industry to, compare notes, ask questions, swap things. Again, a lot of people are reticent to ask questions because they think they should know an answer to things. And the more transparent we can be and the more we can communicate, the better off we're going to be with moving this product into the country.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Um, Talking about some of the future impacts that we can potentially see, obviously we're heading into Q4, we're heading into holiday season. I think a lot of industry, or a lot of organizations in the sports and fitness industry have started to experience the running out of product that they had ordered prior to the initial round of tariffs earlier this year. And we're also then getting into the changing of seasonality and, again, holiday season time. Um, as interesting as it is the media and the news cycle do sometimes affect decision making with this administration. And so I very much liked that we saw a lot of talk about tariffs around back to school materials. The more that's going to happen with holiday season, that can help us as well. The administration understanding what this is doing to businesses and what it's doing to the sports and fitness industry is important, but also the overall public economic pressure is important too. So these are all things that we very much keep an eye on to see where are these things going to hit a nexus and what is that going to look like. Additional things with future impacts is that Ideally, we will eventually have more clarity on a lot of these deals. So we have frameworks right now because countries are negotiating back and forth together. And eventually, those negotiations will be hashed out. We will have some more of those details. But that's another thing that's important about, as they say, keeping the receipts. So let's say, for example, right now, you're trying to calculate a duty rate, you're trying to fill in paperwork. And because it's September 30th, we don't know as much as we might know on October 15th. So just being able to really document that, and even if it's kind of informally for you all and your teams, being able to say, we did this work then, this is what we knew, these were the sources that we used, I think that's going to be really important and really, really helpful. Future deals and details will continue to be forthcoming. Our hope is that once a couple of these countries can iron out their deals, that is a framework, and that's something that's helpful for other negotiations because people will know how to get in the room together. They will know what they want these deals to look like. But ultimately, they're going to continue to come. I don't think as fast and furious as we've seen of late. And I don't think we will see much more happen between now and the Supreme Court case outcome, or at least start of the case. The tariffs that were announced yesterday were kind of talked about and whispered about previously, but there hasn't been anything else that is currently kind of on the DC scenes behind the radar other than what was announced yesterday. That doesn't mean that won't change. Things can change very quickly in this environment, but I do think we will be in a period right now where it's a little quieter on the tariff news front while some of these things play themselves out in the courts and while there are some other priorities. Robin, I'll pause there. Any questions that are coming up for you as we walk through? Or not even maybe from the chat, but just any questions that come up on your radar?
No, I think this is I think this is really helpful. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about the government shutdown stuff or if we want to get to that later. But my question is, I mean, news headlines are impending and very timely of today of a government
Yeah.
shutdown. Is any of that going to affect any of the paperwork, any of
Mhm.
the work? How is that factor
Yeah.
into today and
Yeah.
this
Great
topic?
question. I think it is a good time to talk about it. What has been so as of now, tariffs are going to continue to be collected. I think a lot of people who I think we're starting to get a lot of questions about what is going to happen with tariffs, with needing to pay my duties, with the government shutdown. Tariffs have been considered essential, so they will continue to be collected. But exactly what that looks like on the Customs and Border Patrol side will remain to be seen because until the shutdown happens, there can be staffing plans that are published and proposed, but we won't actually know until that shutdown happens and an OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, gives directives around who is essential or exempt, as it's called, and who is not, and what that will mean for the speed of this process. So there will be some unknowns around that. If the government shutdown is relatively short, what we are currently hearing is they anticipate about a week, then we'll probably have a little bit of a hitch, but it will pick back up. If the government shutdown extends beyond, then there is the potential for some reclassifications of people who were considered exempt to get some more people staffed in there. So it's been a very interesting process around this particular government shutdown because there's not really a playbook as far as the way this is going down versus the way previous shutdowns have gone down. And so one thing that remains yet to be seen in terms of some of the agencies we talked about earlier, like the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and the Department of Commerce, the Office of Management and Budget will denote for those people who can continue to work, who can make public appearances, potentially what they can work on. We do assume that tariffs will remain on the table for all of that, which in some cases is not a bad thing. We at SFIA have been making really good inroads with both of those groups. And if there's some other work that's slowing down a little bit, that may help us get in the door a little bit faster. So we do always look for these silver linings and everything. And then on the Hill side, you'll see a difference depending on each office. So a lot of Hill staffers or Hill offices will say that they are always essential, so all of their staff must stay there. We'll probably see more of that on the Republican side than the Democrat side right now, just because of the way the politics will play out. And so there is a lot of uncertainty around what that can look like, but net is the tariff should not be affected, whether that is a good or bad thing in this case.
Okay, right. Thank you. And we'll
Yes. Yes,
keeping an
absolutely.
eye on that today.
Yes, absolutely. A couple of other things too to note are we sort of have put together a very informal chart and happy to offline with anyone about it. Is also being mindful of if you're subject to say a 232, depending on your product, the makeup of your product, you may or may not be subject to the IEPA. So trying to work that through as best as possible. And want everyone on this call to know that even trade firms are struggling with what the answers to that are. The other thing that's key to keep in mind is that you have your country specific tariffs and then you have your product classification. This is again where the 232s and the reciprocal and IEPA tariffs can kind of converge, is that in some cases you may only be subject to your 232 or you may only be subject to country tariff depending on percentage of your product, the harmonized tariff schedule, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It goes really into the weeds on some of these things. That said, and just to make everyone feel, well, I don't know, better, but to make you feel better about all the uncertainty and the unknown right now, even when the recent 232s came out, there's 10 digits in product classification codes, and some of the newly published ones were only 8 digits, which is why people couldn't find their products. They didn't know what was happening. Again, that's indicative of there being a lot of unknowns on both sides, and that's why again, it's really important to reach out. And we know that not everyone has the ability to have a trade attorney, contact a trade attorney. A lot of the trade attorneys are still working these things through too. So that's where these questions are really important, because we as SFIA can take that work back, talk to the people in our networks. As Robin said at the top of the call, we can talk to Washington and then be able to bring you some more of those answers. I think the more questions we get, the better that helps all of us on this side of the issue dig in and find these answers and know more things. And it's felt that way since April 2nd, where the types of questions we get allow us to really go deep and learn more and be able to help the industry as much as we can, which is what our mission is in all of this.
I mean, I would encourage everyone on this who's listening now or listening afterward. We're going to keep these, the chat open. You'll be able to comment on LinkedIn or send to me directly or any of us at Racquet questions as they come up or you think of them. I mean, this is what SFIA is for. They're here to help, and like you're not alone navigating this. I think is one point. Whether you're an association, you sell a product, you're at a club and don't understand how to interpret tariffs or what's going to happen if you're in the process of building, all of these things I think the big thing that I wanted to stress is that you don't have to have a trade or an attorney that's specifically as part of your team for this, that there are organizations like SFIA who can really help us all navigate this that's happening.
Yep.
So the more questions, the better. Nothing's silly. And if in the chat, if it's helpful to break down a lot of these, almost like a vocabulary lexicon of like what 232s mean, IEPA,
Yeah.
etc. If we're even at a level before that, just let me know. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I don't know what half of these things mean, if I'm being completely honest with you. I'm going to do my own research on it, and then we can share that out too, if it's even a step before some of the stuff that we're talking about. Just again, happy for us to play a part in making sure that everybody gets the information that they need.
Yes, it has been a crash course for all of us in some of these terminologies, and I feel like every day I learn something new, and it's amazing how deep some of these things go. But
It doesn't feel like you are learning on the fly, Bonnie. It feels like you are very, very well versed in this, to be honest.
April 2nd was quite a crash course. I joke, not jokingly, that from about April 2nd to May 12th, I never went anywhere without the phone with me. I think I went to the restroom one time without it and felt awful, and my eye was just twitching the entire month.
I
So
believe it.
crash course, but it's so important and it was an opportunity to get to meet and talk with a lot of SFIA members that I would not have gotten to talk to so early in my tenure with the organization. So even though it was for this reason, that, as Robin, you said, that's why we're here. We're here to help you navigate that. We're here to help you decipher these things. And we are that convener and that strength and safety in numbers for you all, as much as anyone can be in these current circumstances. Another important thing to talk about is being as aware as possible of your supply chain, especially with some of the more recent UFLPA rulings that have come out, or maybe legislation is maybe a better term for it. UFLPA is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and primarily previously this had affected workers in certain regions of China, and it touched the apparel industry, but not so much the equipment side of things. That is now being put under a little bit more of a microscope. We have not, transparently had any members have any issues with this, or we haven't gotten a lot of questions about it. But we also just want to make sure that when people see that moniker out there, they don't think, oh, I wouldn't be affected by that. What's tricky about UFLPA is that your supplier may be getting something from a supplier who's getting something from a supplier down the line, and you may not be able to see it transparently, and you may not realize that that's the case. But just because we can only have so much control of these things and only have the capacity to track it so far back, it's just important to do a little bit of a cleanse and a look at that supply chain and try to go as far as you can to make sure that best efforts are being made in terms of sourcing ethically. And again, that's something that if you are in a situation where you can document that you have done that work, even if something comes from a supplier that you didn't have the knowledge of, you can at least show, well, how could I have known that? This is as far as I could track. Now I know this, we will be changing suppliers. And so it's an interesting, a little bit of a loophole. Again, not something for anyone to be overly worried about, but if you do see it pop up, it's an important part of the supply chain conversation. But the supply chain conversation writ large, one of the things that remains very confusing is the timing of a lot of the tariffs around when your product has left its port or is in transit, and what that means for your delivery. So those are, again, things to just document and track, because we're all probably going to make some mistakes on that front. It's especially confusing because some of the tariff announcements come with those clarifications, some do not. And even with the ones that are immediate, it's still a little bit unclear when you get under the hood about what that actually really does mean. So it's we can't stress enough that it's a very frustrating time for business and for planning, but please know that that uncertainty is existing for everyone. A lot of the conversations that I've had with members over the past couple of months have just been people saying, I feel like everyone else knows more than I do, or I want to make sure that I'm not disadvantaged. And it's important for us all to understand that that's really not the case. Everyone's struggling with these confusions, no matter if you are a 200-person company, a 20,000 person company, or a 2-person company.
Um, Bonnie, and I don't know if anything, just I'm going to be really specific on a question. We have a lot of friends of our brand that are based in Europe who
Mm-hmm.
do a ton of business in the US. I guess any little tidbits for them, because they're dealing with,
Yeah.
they have US based, staff, but they're bringing things over from
Mm-hmm.
Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I guess anything specific for them that they should be kind of on the lookout for, challenges
Yeah.
or relief.
Our understanding is that there are still, even though EU has their framework, that there are still negotiations ongoing there. I think that based on, we didn't see any escalations of tariff situation when the president was traveling over in Europe this last week or 2 weeks ago. There was some talk that there could have been some escalations, but there were not, which is ideally a good sign, both from the escalation standpoint, but also from the negotiation standpoint. And so I think it's important to keep an eye on those. And then something that was interesting about the tariffs that were announced yesterday with the 232s on the specific timber and lumber and some other products, there were also some additional carve outs, I guess, for Europe. That language was a little bit different than what we'd seen previously, which was, no product coming from EU will be subject to more than 10%, things of that nature. So I think we are seeing some softening there. And I also think that regardless of or separate from the Supreme Court lawsuit, and next we can go into what some of the outcomes of those scenarios will be. But I also think something else that was indicative with China was that the rhetoric that we saw between the two countries really de-escalated the last time the China extension was announced. The language from the White House was much, much softer. So I think negotiations are obviously negotiations are progressing, but I think that there is a realization that what the administration thought this was going to do to China, or the position China would be in, is not actually the position that they were in. And so even though we'll never see that in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, they realize that they have to give some leverage because that situation did not play out necessarily the way that they thought. We will probably see another pause for China just based on the Supreme Court timing, since IEEPA is such a big part of those. And so that the group is informed, there are, as far as we can tell, there's kind of like 4 different scenarios that could come out of the Supreme Court challenge. One is that they uphold the IEEPA tariffs just unilaterally, so that it's done legally, everything can continue to happen. It will probably, the IEEPA will probably get slapped on a few things that seem really ridiculous just because of the administration taking the victory lap. There's also a version where the court rules that only the reciprocal and IEEPA, like the only pieces, like say, for example, only the fentanyl piece or only political retribution pieces are unlawful within reciprocal and IEEPA tariffs. So then you have a process of going to the lower courts and determining if what can be returned to a company if they're deemed eligible. Because the additional layer there is that we don't know if any returns that are possible are going to be unilateral to everyone who's paid the tariffs, or if they will be only to the plaintiffs in the court cases for these tariffs. That's a big unknown right now too. The Supreme Court can also rule that, that only reciprocal IEEPA are unlawful, which again puts us in that same scenario. And then the third scenario is Supreme Court rules that IEEPA does not allow for any tariffs, and in theory, all IEEPA goes away. The administration, I think, is pretty quickly ready to use 232s and others to keep the level of tariffs that they want instated. But then that, if we're kind of in that full green light scenario where IEEPA does not allow for tariffs, then it's an even more confusing scenario in terms of those returns. Because to me, I interpret that as, if the Supreme Court says IEEPA cannot be used for tariffs, it would seem that you should be returning on a much more unilateral basis, because you have said you've completely struck down this case, versus the in-betweens that might allow for just those plaintiffs or particular groups to be able to get returns. Also, returns won't be automatic, unfortunately. Not that anyone was expecting that they would be, but that's again that importance of your paperwork and being able to show what you've paid and when you paid it, and you made best efforts to follow along and keep up with these rules and announcements, because there will likely be some sort of application process, for lack of a better term, where you would go in and apply for the return that would be applicable to you. So those are pretty wide-ranging scenarios, but those are the 4 that we've been able to deduce are most likely possible, and working with some of our partners who are in the legal space. And returns from that, whether they come through, won't be quick. So, we don't advise, not that anyone would, but we don't advise that anyone looks at Q1 2026 and plans on having any tariff revenue that you've spent back. I think, everyone should continue to operate business as usual as much as you can right now. And if there is financial retribution that comes from the court cases, that is a very nice to have, but not something that anyone should plan for.
Okay. Um, where can people go to stay up to date on this stuff? So we're having our webinar, we're going to have part 2, of course, but you know, um, as things change, like
Yeah.
what are some of the best resources for this industry and for these folks to kind of follow along as a single source of truth of information?
Yes.
Because we
Mhm.
know that that isn't necessarily the way the world works today. There's a lot
Yeah.
of rumor, there's a lot of hearsay, and a lot of people who say things maybe out of context in turn.
Yes. Yes, there are a couple of sources. The harmonized tariff schedule is one, even though that, again, there's some unanswered questions there. The Federal Register is another. And then as as spinned as it may be, whitehouse.gov is another, because that is at least where we know whether or not details are real. Something has been announced, that means people are working on it. So, like for me, I am refreshing whitehouse.gov multiple times a day. And also clicking into things that look a little bit like, that headline seems kind of odd. What are we really saying in this announcement? And staying on top of those things so that nothing gets buried on behalf of the industry. But we continue to check in there, and then also keep in close contact with the U.S. Trade Representative's office and Department of Commerce, because the 232s run through the Department of Commerce. So that's really where for us USTR has pointed questions about 232s to that group in particular. So those would be some of your good resources.
And
And
you all are putting out information as
yes,
well. Yeah.
we have, yep, we send updates to our members when something's published on whitehouse.gov. And then what we've started to do is, if there's other speculative news, we will note that this news is speculative. So and so has said we have a deal with Vietnam. There's not actually a framework yet, or there's not actually an announcement yet, or the announcement's one-sided kind of thing. And you can
Hmm.
always gut check that with us too, because it is very confusing, and there are a lot of sources out there. I have gotten multiple times over the course of the last couple of months a text or a call or an email from a member saying, I'm not in front of the TV right now, but I hear that he's signing Vietnam in the Oval Office. And you look over and that's not what's happening. So it's but you can always gut check with us what those sources and resources are. And if there's questions about them further, then SFIA can take those directly to Commerce or to USTR's
Great.
office or to our contacts in the administration.
Amazing. So we'll put those sites in the chat at some point. Maybe the chat,
Yes.
maybe a comment, not a chat, but we'll make
Yeah,
sure everybody has links to those as
share
well,
those
post
resources.
call.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. And something else too, and I think most people have seen enough of the pattern of this to understand it, but the legislative actions that are happening currently are very, very much not coming from Capitol Hill, regardless of if the Hill is, regardless of what's happening over there. Some of the recent Hill activities have actually been designed so that members do not have to speak or enact anything on the tariffs, because the Republicans know that they are not popular. We did an advocacy letter writing campaign back in April, which sounds kind of old fashioned, but it still works. And not only did we hear from almost every office we reached out to, the Republicans especially really wanted to talk with us and understand impacts of the communities, so that they can go to the administration and say, hey, it's not me saying this, it's my constituents, it's the businesses in my community. So we do continue to pound that drum, but there was very little awareness on the Hill side of what was going to happen in early April prior to that time. And the Hill will be very quick to tell you that they are not involved in the decision making. So as far as any activity with any of your local representatives or state level representatives, anything like that, I think bearing in mind approaching those people in an accessible education way is the way to go, and not berating them, or blaming them for the tariffs, because it's really all happening from kind of a couple of people in one building in theory.
Got it. I mean, my big takeaway, and again, if anybody has questions, keep putting them in the chat. But I see lots of chatting, but no questions really yet. I mean, my big takeaway, and if there's anything else you want to elaborate on it, was when you said the if this if this then that scenario planning, and
Mhm.
that everyone should have a playbook for all scenarios. And
Yep.
I like that. In events, we're always thinking about plan A, B, C, D, E, and scenario planning on variables, controllable and uncontrollable, right? And these
Yeah.
are a lot of uncontrollable variables, but right now. But I think that's a great piece for people to take away. Anything else around the context of that, Bonnie, that you want to mention? But I think that was a good nugget for
I
everyone.
think using events terminology is a good way to think of it. So, if I put on my events hat, it's not if, but when something will happen, something will go wrong. And the most
Correct.
important thing is that you don't panic and you know what you're doing behind the scenes. And so, yeah, that if that then, and we do have, it's kind of ever changing, and it's of course open to some interpretation from the legal standpoint as new announcements come out and new things are further explained. But if people do have specific questions, we can happily offline kind of try to do a best if that then scenario for you.
Cool. Great. Um, uh, that's awesome. I like again, I think that's the best way for everyone to just kind of understand what all the repercussions are of different scenarios. So
Yes.
that's what we
Mhm.
do.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned there's a lot of chat and not a lot of questions because that does tend to kind of be what happens on this topic. It sort of
Yeah.
just people get talking or there's maybe making, not making statements, but kind of stating things. And we're all figuring out how to even ask
I don't
questions.
know if people know what the questions they need to
Yeah.
be asking. It's probably part of it, but I hope that this sparks conversation, collaboration. Like you said, that was the second biggest takeaway for me is that while there may be, you may have competitors in this field, there's a common, I don't want to say enemy, that's not fair, but like tariffs are,
Yes.
the common factor that everybody's working toward. And this is a great opportunity to collaborate with your competitors on making sure that you're kind of uniting
Yep.
and kind of running and making sure you're showing strength that way
Yes.
towards solution.
Tariffs are our common challenge, and it's our industry. It's pretty much every industry, and so there's probably no peer of yours in business that you can talk to who's not affected by this right now and not continuing to be affected. So we will all, as we said at the outset, we will all navigate and work through this together.
Great. Bonnie, I don't have any, I mean, I don't have anything else. Chat wise, like I said, I think we're gonna, there's some amazing sound bites from here. I am confident we'll have questions come in, over the next couple of days as this continues to replay. I guess any final notes from you for the group, and if not, we'll dismiss class for the day. What's really funny, Bonnie, this is me pretending my dream when I was in college. I was a political science major, and I thought that I was going to be lobbying.
Ah,
However, here we are in events, and this is my go at kind of playing that
as the
role that I
lobbying
never got.
scientist. um, it's funny the events tie in. I mean, there's so much about what we're currently experiencing that we have all experienced in different types of business and things we've done before. And so, everyone's on your toes. Like we talked about the playbook, we talked about working together, we talked about reaching out, asking questions, and then I think just generally. As you start to think about questions as we head into our next webinar in this series, just let the questions play out, let your thoughts play out, think about the statements or the conversations you're having and if any of those could flip into questions, and really just don't be afraid to reach out to us or to those in your network, and know that from the SFIA standpoint we will continue to share as much information with you as possible. What we have tried to not do is so there, like on our website for example, there's some older tariffs, some older policy updates. We're in the process of revamping that, but we're trying to be less so about, we want our site to be a resource, but things are changing so quickly that we're really just trying to be more proactive with getting those communications out. So, truly don't be afraid to blow us up and ask all of those questions.
Great. Where should they, I guess, on the, where would be a great place for people to ask questions? Where should they submit those questions to?
They can email me directly if you'd
Oh,
like.
well,
Yeah.
listen to that, guys. Direct line to Washington. So
Super exciting.
well, Bonnie, we'll put your email in the chat as
Great.
well for everyone, along with some of those sites that you mentioned. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and understand this. I think it's important that we provide the information and that the industry understands what's accessible to them, and they're not on their own trying to figure it out. And that's, I think, the biggest takeaway is that there are resources available if you have questions, from as complex to as simple as possible. We appreciate you and all the work that you and the team at SFIA are doing to help this industry. And we cannot wait for part two. I'm sure it's going to be even juicier
Yeah,
over
I
the
was
next
just going to
couple
say
of weeks.
juicy. Juicy is the word that comes to mind. Well, thank you very much for having me. It is an honor to be here and great to get to chat with you all. Looking forward to our next session, and we'll be thrilled to hear from anyone in between sessions if you have any questions.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Again, registration for the big event in March 13th to the 15th, Fort Lauderdale. They go live tomorrow, October 1st. We can't wait. Also, if anyone's still listening, we have a little, I'm going to do some posts about it, but we have a chat bot named Raquel who can answer all of your questions about RacketX in the chat with us button on our website. So check her out because she's the newest member of the team. And we're very excited about that. So thank you, Bonnie. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you all in November at part 2.